The Book of Enoch is perhaps the most controversial book that didn't make it into the Christian Bible.
The Book of Enoch.
Oh man, the Book of Enoch, powerful book. You know that Enoch was a real powerful man because he's talked about in the Bible, yet his book is not in the Bible.
Just minutes ago, a 2,000-year-old translation of the Gospel of Matthew has exposed terrifying secrets about our past. Buried in a 6th century manuscript, these words were nearly lost, hidden under layers of newer texts on scarce parchment. This version tells a darker, more mysterious version of the Bible we thought we knew. What if it changes everything? Let's uncover the shocking truths hidden in these ancient pages, a dramatic exploration through ancient texts. These pages, dating back to the 6th century CE, contain an old Syriac translation that covers parts of Matthew, specifically from chapters 11 and 12. These pages were originally part of a much older manuscript, but were cut and reused because parchment was expensive and hard to find in some regions. Back then, scribes would often erase old writings from parchments to make room for new text. This practice resulted in multiple layers of text on the same page, which scholars now call a palimpsest. As the dusk settled over the ancient texts, a faint, almost imperceptible script began to emerge beneath the well-known words of Matthew. Even though the original text was scraped off, some traces of ink stayed deep within the parchment. Using UV light photography, these hidden texts can be seen again. When researchers compared this newly discovered text to other Syriac versions of Matthew, they realized it was the 4th known manuscript of the old Syriac version of the Gospels. This version, translated from Greek into Syriac in the 3rd century CE, shows that the Syriac translation of Matthew existed about 100 years before the Greek version found in the Codex Sinaiticus. The Codex Sinaiticus is the oldest complete copy of the Greek New Testament. This discovery gives us a fresh look at how the Gospel of Matthew was passed down through history. For the most part, the newly found text is similar to the versions we have today. But in Matthew chapter 12, there is a small yet interesting difference. In the Greek versions, like the Codex Sinaiticus, the passage describes him and his disciples walking through grain fields on the Sabbath, where the disciples pick heads of grain to eat because they were hungry. But in this old Syriac version, it says they not only picked the grain, but also rubbed it in their hands before eating, adding a small but meaningful detail to the story. But that's not the most surprising part. Dr. Kessel warns it's still too soon to say what this find means for the bigger picture of the Gospel's history. This fragment of text is very small, making up only about 0.6% of the total text of the 4 Gospels. However, he believes this discovery should inspire scholars to keep searching for more old Syriac fragments. If more are found, it could show that the Syriac version of the Gospel was more common and important than we thought, even before the famous Codex Sinaiticus. So while there's still a lot to learn, this find gives us hope that more pieces of this ancient puzzle are waiting to be uncovered. Over the years, significant alterations have been made to the Bible by the Vatican, leading to a disparity between the original teachings and what is commonly believed today. Such modifications have stirred debates and controversies, including the startling claim that it was not Jesus but Judas who was crucified. Scandals within the Christian Church are not a recent phenomenon. However, they have been more prominently featured in recent news. Motivated by these revelations and ongoing controversies, a deeper exploration into the ancient texts was undertaken to uncover any potential truths that might have been concealed by the Vatican from the public eye. This investigation aimed to shed light on the historical accuracy and integrity of these religious documents, questioning whether the public has been misled by historical revisions and omissions. Let's uncover a surprising discovery that questions what we thought we knew. Revelations and controversies. One of the most interesting discoveries comes from the Gospel of Barnabas. This document challenges many of the stories the church has told about him. It was found unexpectedly in 2000 during a police raid in Cyprus that was aimed at stopping smugglers. Imagine the surprise when officers stumbled upon an ancient manuscript in the seized items. After careful study, experts found that this manuscript was about 1,500 years old. It took over 10 years of legal battles, but in 2012, the manuscript was finally handed over to a museum in Turkey for a closer look. Scholars were surprised by the claim that the Apostle Barnabas wrote the text. Traditionally, Barnabas wasn't thought to be one of the 12 apostles who followed him closely, but according to this gospel, he didn't have just 12 apostles, he had 70, and Barnabas was one of the leaders. Even more surprising, the text strongly criticizes Paul, who wrote many letters that make up a large part of the New Testament. He argues that Paul was wrong to believe that he was the Son of God. Instead, he insists that there is only one God, completely rejecting the idea of the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, which has been a key part of Christian belief. Interestingly, the word Trinity doesn't even appear in the Bible. It was introduced later at the First Council of Nicaea in the 4th century, shaping the Christian teachings that followed. But here's where it gets even more controversial. In chapter 39 of his gospel, he describes him as just a regular man who reached divine understanding. He also says that the real Messiah wouldn't come for another 500 years. Many Muslims believe this is a reference to the birth of Muhammad in Mecca, which happened around 5 centuries after him. On top of that, he gives a different view of paradise than what's taught in many Christian traditions, suggesting that early Christians may have had more varied beliefs than we think. This makes you wonder, what else might have been changed or hidden in the centuries of religious teachings and interpretations? Imagine it like a tower with 9 different levels, almost like 9 versions of paradise or a layered underworld. At the top, the holiest people live in peace, far away from the problems below. But as you go down to the lower levels, life starts to look a lot more like it does on Earth. For Christians, this means they must live with even greater honesty and faith if they want to reach the highest, most divine places. But the real twist comes later in the gospel story. One of the lesser-known apostles, he tells a different version of a key event in the New Testament. According to him, during the Last Supper, he already knew that Judas was going to betray him. However, when the soldiers came to arrest him, something unexpected happened. Instead of him being captured, angels carried him away through a window. At the same time, God made Judas look exactly like him. So when the soldiers crucified someone, it wasn't actually him, it was Judas. Next, we dive into a gospel that challenges a key historical event. Texts that challenge tradition. He felt it was important to write this down so people would know what really happened. Some think he was trying to discredit Paul by strongly opposing his version of events, but it raises a big question. Can we really trust what he wrote? What's interesting is that even though his account is controversial, the Vatican has shown interest in studying the text. However, their actions have been strange and inconsistent. There have been legal battles over the Gospel of Barnabas, with church officials often stepping in, wanting the text to go straight to a museum rather than into the hands of scholars. It's as if they're afraid this different story might shake the foundation of Christian beliefs. For centuries, people have debated whether the crucifixion site and the relics linked to it are truly authentic. When Helena, the mother of Emperor Constantine, claimed to have found the true cross, pieces of it were spread across Europe and turned into cherished relics. However, not everyone believed this story. The French theologian John Calvin joked that if you gathered all the fragments that were said to be from the true cross, you'd have enough wood to build another church. Yet, despite such criticism, the Vatican often ignores these challenges, just like it does with other Christian texts that offer a different point of view. Over time, it's become clear that the Vatican has shaped the biblical text to fit its needs. This isn't just a theory, it's a known fact. For example, in 1684, the church removed 14 books from the Bible. At first, there were 80 books in total, but they decided to cut some out. This habit of shaping the narrative to fit their own story isn't new. It's something the church has been doing throughout its long history. A long time ago, some gospels that didn't match the teachings of the church were grouped under the name Apocrypha, which comes from a Greek word meaning hidden. But what could have been so important that the Vatican felt the need to hide it? One of these texts, called the Gospel of Thomas, was found in December of 1945 near Nag Hammadi, Egypt. This document was dug up from what used to be a large library, probably buried because Bishop Athanasius was suspicious of what it contained. The text shows a very different picture of him than what most people are used to. In the Gospel of Thomas, he is portrayed as easily irritated, self-centered, and claiming to be divine at a very young age just as soon as he could speak. The Gospels most people are familiar with don't tell us much about his early life. Maybe these stories didn't fit with what was already accepted and that's why they were hidden. The Gospel of Thomas doesn't really tell the story of his life either. Instead, it focuses on his teachings, urging people to find the deeper meaning in his words. Thomas believed that understanding these meanings was the key to salvation, not just doing good deeds. This makes things difficult for followers, as Thomas suggests many people won't be able to reach heaven because they won't understand these teachings. Now, we'll look at a text that questions who really gets to enter paradise: the Gospel of Thomas and forgotten teachings. But that's not all. This version of Christianity was not very welcoming to new followers. That might explain why the Gospel of Thomas was considered one of the hidden texts. It contains 114 sayings attributed to him, and 40 of those sayings can't be found in any other religious text. What's more, about half of these unique sayings deal with controversial ideas about women. For example, he supposedly says he will turn Mary Magdalene into a man so she can enter heaven, suggesting that women's souls may not be immortal. So, according to the Gospel of Thomas, heaven is only for a specific group: circumcised men who can understand the complex meanings behind his words. This makes Thomas's message seem very exclusive, and it's still a source of debate among scholars and religious experts today. Let's start by looking at some controversial sayings attributed to him and whether they belong in the sacred texts. The issue of these sayings seems to come from the author himself. Thomas, for example, claims to be his twin, though from a different mother. It's no surprise his gospel was left out of the Bible, but what's interesting is why it was even considered in the first place. Could it be that at first, Thomas's ideas didn't worry the church, but later caused problems? This question has led scholars and clergy over the years to push for certain texts to be excluded from the Bible. Religion can be a sensitive subject, but it's important to question those who shape it, especially when there have been notable mistakes, like the story of the female pope in the year 858. A big scandal happened in Vatican City when Pope John VII, after 2 years in office, suddenly fell ill during a procession. It turned out this wasn't just an illness. Pope John was actually in labor right in the street. Later known as Pope Joan, she was a highly educated woman from Germany who had disguised herself as a man to get an education. She wasn't interested in the traditional roles for women at the time, so she kept her identity hidden. Once in Rome, she was ordained and quickly moved up the ranks of the church. But her success came to a tragic end when she became pregnant after an affair with a church official. She didn't make it back to the palace in time to hide her child, and when the truth came out, people were furious. She was stoned to death on the spot where she gave birth. Today, the church denies this story ever happened, claiming it's completely made up. But why should we accept this denial without asking questions? What evidence does the Vatican provide to support their rejection of such stories, or to explain the texts that were removed from the Bible? Additionally, some of the texts considered unreliable or apocryphal don't just conflict with Christian teachings, they also don't make sense. Take the Gospel of Barnabas, for example. It's full of geographical errors. It says he and his disciples traveled to Nazareth, described as near the Sea of Galilee, when Nazareth is actually 25 kilometers inland. There are other mistakes too, like suggesting Tyre is near the Jordan River, even though it's 48 kilometers away. And in chapter 63, Nineveh is placed near the Mediterranean Sea, though it's far inland in modern-day Iraq. Moving on, we explore historical errors that raise big questions about authenticity, exposing Barnabas's medieval echoes. But that's not the most confusing part. These errors continue with details about Pontius Pilate's rule and the use of wine barrels way before they were even invented. This raises a bigger question. What was Barnabas basing his claims on? What did they know about history at the time? We often blame Barnabas's mistakes on his lack of understanding in certain areas, but it's harder to explain why his gospel has so much in common with medieval writings. For example, he often uses the phrase false and lying gods when talking about him. This isn't something found in the Bible or the Quran, but it does appear in the works of Dante Alighieri, a poet from the 14th century. Both Dante and Barnabas also use the phrase raging hunger. Even more interesting, Barnabas describes hell as having 7 levels, with each level giving sinners different punishments, which is quite similar to Dante's Divine Comedy. This raises a question. Was Barnabas someone with visions of the future, or just a medieval writer trying to add to the Bible? Most modern experts think his work is much younger than people originally thought, likely written around the year 1500, not 1500 years ago. On the other hand, the Gospel of Thomas fits better with historical timelines, and most people don't question its authenticity even though the author doesn't provide many details about his life. Barnabas's writings have faced a lot of criticism. Theologians have disliked his gospel so much that a group was even created to discredit it. Famous figures like Origen of Alexandria called it fake and heretical. Eusebius, a Greek historian, dismissed it as nonsense and disrespectful, and Cyril of Jerusalem went so far as to advise people to stay away from it completely. But here's the thing. This widespread rejection almost feels like a strategy to make people more curious about the gospel, especially during Christianity's early days when much of the world was still pagan. Thomas might have thought that making the Bible stories resemble pagan myths would make Christianity more attractive to people. For example, he claimed to be his twin, born to a different mother, which is similar to the Greek myth of Heracles and his twin brother Iphicles. This portrayal of him as somewhat distant might be a reflection of how pagan gods were seen, which could have felt odd compared to Christian values. Perhaps the Vatican itself decided to tweak the Gospel of Thomas to draw more followers, and once Christianity became popular, they no longer needed it, so they buried the text. But this wasn't the only attempt to clean things up. The Bible itself is full of inconsistencies that make people question the authority of the Vatican. In ancient times, asking tough questions about religious texts was seen as a way to gain wisdom, but today, we can freely critique them. For instance, the Old Testament's creation story gives two different accounts. One where men and women are created at the same time, and another where Eve is created from Adam's rib. There are also differences in the Gospels when it comes to key moments like his final words, suggesting either people's memories faded or changes were made on purpose. Even basic math seems to be a problem in the Bible. The Gospel of John mentions Nicodemus bringing a huge amount of myrrh and aloes to anoint his body, an amount so large it seems like an obvious editing mistake. All these issues suggest that the scriptures we hold sacred today are just a small piece of a much larger puzzle, and much of it is likely hidden away in the Vatican's secret archives, kept out of public view. What do you think? Are there hidden truths in the Vatican archives? Like, comment, and subscribe for more.